So welcome again to tonight's webinar. My name is Joanna and I am the Climate Resilience Engagement Associate with the Charles River Watershed Association. And we are excited to present our newly started regional tree planting and protection plan to you all. This is tonight's agenda covering project background and recommended strategies. And as you see, we'll have a question and answer at the end, but if you have questions at any point during the presentation, please send them to me or Dara and Ilsia, and we'll answer them during the question and answer session at the end. So before we begin, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. Charles River Watershed Association would like to acknowledge that here in our watershed, we are on sacred land that was stolen and holds a history of violence and slavery. We recognize the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag peoples as the traditional stewards of this watershed land. We honor the legacy of life, knowledge, and skills stolen due to the violence and colonization as we do our work. So in case you're unfamiliar, who are we? The Charles River Watershed Association, or CRWA, has been around since 1965, and we are an environmental advocacy organization working towards protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Charles River and its watershed through science, advocacy, and the law. And so like many urban rivers, in this country, the Charles River has been historically contaminated with factory waste, chemical waste, and the creation of dams, resulting in poor water quality and aquatic habitat. So our work continues to focus on ensuring that the river and its watershed is healthy. To orient everyone on the total geographic area we are talking about, the Charles River itself is 80 miles long. It starts from Hopkinton, moving its way downstream to the Boston Harbor that you can see on this map. Our watershed, which is an area of land that captures rain and drains it into the river, is a little over 300 square miles, which is in the other shade of light blue, and 35 Massachusetts towns and cities are a part of our watershed, and we have over 1 million people in the watershed, with over 60% of them designated in environmental justice neighborhoods. And lastly, as an organization, we like to talk and do our work and mission at a watershed scale view, not just the river and not just by town and city boundaries, because what happens upstream in the watershed doesn't stay upstream. Everything is connected. So what are we protecting and restoring the river and its watershed from? Like I mentioned, many urban river watersheds, there's threats to the health of the river environment include flood, drought, water quality issues, environmental injustices, and extreme heat impacts. And these threats have many different causes, but the main factor we as an organization are working to address is the impervious surface. So the amount of impervious surface in our watershed. Impervious surfaces are simply put just hard surfaces that prevent rain from soaking into the ground, that are mainly artificial structures like roads, parking lots, driveways, rooftops, and like you can already see, they can cause issues like flooding because instead of having tree soil wetlands, things that are pervious and allow water to get absorbed into the ground, water now has fewer places to go to be absorbed. And many of our current built environment, our pipes, culverts are not built to handle the future of storms that we are expecting with climate change now. Impervious surface also causes stormwater runoff, which, as the name indicates, is when stormwater and rainwater that lands on our rooftops, roads, and driveways runs off, carrying pollutants like fertilizer, dog waste, trash, anything like that from those impervious surfaces into our storm drains, which leads straight into our streams and rivers, and it lowers the water quality. And so this is why you see signs that say don't dump into storm drains, because it drains into our watershed. Additionally, as you can imagine and probably have experienced, a lot of dark impervious surfaces like asphalt also lead to hotter temperatures, and in highly urbanized places, this can contribute to the urban heat island effect. At CRWA, we advocate and work on projects that help bring or keep nature on our watershed using what we like to call nature-based solutions. This is because we know that nature works like a sponge and a filter in the environment. And so solutions like protecting and restoring wetlands, conserving open space, and increasing tree canopy are just some of the ways we can have more pervious environment to combat the threats to the watershed's health. Now I'm going to pass it off to Dira to talk about how we're working at the watershed scale to implement these solutions.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. Hello, everyone. My name is Dara Johaniff, and I'm the Climate Resilience Manager at CRWA. And as Joanna mentioned earlier, our organization, likes to take a watershed scale view when we think about our mission and our solutions for climate change, which is critical for us because in Massachusetts we don't really have a strong regional or county governance like other states do. So in this case, individual municipalities are typically isolated in planning for climate impacts. But as we all know, climate impacts don't respect man-made boundaries like town lines or even state lines. And so in 2019, we established the Charles River Climate Compact, which is a regional partnership of 28 watershed towns and cities in response to that need to communicate with one another, share resources, and address climate impacts collectively. Today, the Climate Compact's mission is to work collaboratively to increase climate resiliency for people and the natural ecosystem in the Charles River watershed. And we do that by taking a regional approach to implementing solutions that address extreme heat, drought, and flooding through multiple avenues of funding, planning, as well as policy changes. As a collaborative, one of the major regional scale planning efforts that the group has done and worked together on over the past 4 years is the Charles River flood model. This is a watershed scale model that shows where and when flooding will occur in the future and has resulted over the years multiple flood mitigation projects in our communities, maybe even some that you guys are a part of. The group has also identified tree canopy as a climate resilience tool to address many of the local climate impacts that the municipalities are trying to solve. And this has led us to pursue funding to create a regional plan, or to create this regional plan, which is a watershed scale plan that will incorporate a summary of the existing conditions of tree canopy and policies in our watershed, as well as recommended strategies for protecting existing tree canopy, expanding tree canopy, and also maintaining the tree canopy that we currently have, as well as ones that we plan to expand and grow in the future. I'm sure many of us here are already familiar with the benefits of trees, and so this slide is really to just underscore the multiple and co-benefits of having trees in our environment to address climate impacts we're experiencing, including the stormwater runoff issue that Joanna mentioned earlier, as well as the urban heat island effects that a lot of our lower communities, our more urbanized communities are experiencing. And so you might be wondering, why do we need a regional tree plan? Like Joanna said, there are 35 different cities and towns in our watershed. Some of them, like Boston or Cambridge, already have their own urban forest plans, and they may have the funding or staff to manage the current tree canopy, but not every town does. Some other towns in our watershed might actually have the space for more trees, but not the staff or the funding to actually do the work for it. And so that's really where this regional tree plan comes in. The goal, or one of the goals, was to really look at trees across the entire watershed and get a really big picture view of what's happening, where the gaps are, and what challenges different communities are facing when it comes to growing and caring for their trees. Through this process, we've also identified what's working well in terms of strategies, policies, and best practices that could be shared across towns so that everyone's not starting from scratch. Another big reason for doing this at the regional level is to try and stay consistent across neighboring towns, which could also really help maximize the benefits of tree planting and care across the whole watershed. At the end of this, this plan can be used by our municipal staff in the Charles River Climate Compact group, or it could also be used by local community groups who care about trees to help guide other decision-making processes, maybe about planting, policy, and other future planning efforts like open space plans or climate action plans that do relate to trees. And so tonight you'll hear about the recommendations that our team has compiled for the plan. And these recommendations we really couldn't have done it without help from our technical advisory committee, who help provide expert input and guidance on the development of the strategies, as well as Watershed residents who filled out our community surveys. And if any of you guys in the audience had filled out one or both of our surveys, thank you again for participating and providing your input. And with that, I'll actually hand it over to our consulting team, members from the Corcoran Environmental Consulting Group, to introduce themselves, and I'll also pass it over for them to start going through some of our work as well as our recommended strategies.
Thank you, Dara, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. So I'll just dive in. I'm Claire Corcoran. I have a master's in forestry and am a Massachusetts certified arborist. Our team also had, in the first half of the project, we had a GIS analyst, the wonderful Chad Fisher, who is now left the consulting world for gainful employment with the City of Boston Parks Department. And I was lucky enough to obtain the services of Amy Whitesides. Amy, do you want to describe your title?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am a landscape architect and I currently teach at Harvard's Graduate School of Design, but previously worked for many years in private practice doing a lot of climate-related work, and maybe in this instance, most notably, I helped to run Boston's urban forest plan. And thank you all for your input. Excited to be here.
Thank you, Amy. Could I get the next slide, please? So our analysis started with the existing tree canopy conditions. We found that canopy cover ranges from 11% in the lower watershed to 71% in the upper watershed, with an average canopy cover of 53%. And it is not distributed equitably across the watershed spatially. Could I get the next slide, please? We compared data from 2008 to 2021 and found that canopy cover declined at an average of around 7%, with some towns losing as much as 23.5% of canopy cover, and the lowest loss at 2.7%. Next slide. Our story map goes into a lot more detail on existing and emerging threats to the urban forest, as well as our analysis and findings. And it can be found on the CRWA website, so be sure to check it out. Next. So our primary recommendation is for cities and towns in the watershed to create an urban forest plan. This process involves gathering data and analyzing it, as well as community input, to develop shared goals for the urban forest. It can also help define specific policies and regulations regarding trees, including how Chapter 87, the state's tree law, will be implemented locally. It can also result in a tree ordinance and related policies for enforcement and mitigation, such as fees and fines. Next slide, please. So to increase the protection of trees through the urban forest planning process, a community can add additional trees to its Chapter 87 definition, which only covers trees in the public right-of-way otherwise. Towns can protect tree and soil health by requiring trees to be protected above and below ground during construction and development. We also recommend towns create new parks and open space when possible, and ensure that energy projects don't impact tree canopy through the new accelerated clean energy permitting and siting process. To increase protection for private trees, towns can consider enacting a private tree ordinance. The protection of additional private land will benefit the tree canopy, and zoning and development regulations can protect and require the physical space for trees above and below ground. Next slide, please. Strategies to expand the tree canopy include using development mitigation to create parks and open space, to partner with community groups to plant trees with private funding, to increase the success rate of newly planted trees through proper planting and consistent watering, to require replacement of Chapter 87 trees when they're removed or die, to prioritize low canopy areas in planting projects, and to create design standards that require trees in public capital projects. For the private tree canopy to expand, tree giveaways are a great way to get trees planted on private property. Additionally, Chapter 87 allows towns to plant on private property up to 20 feet from the public right-of-way. These are called back of sidewalk programs, and they're often the result of the urban forest planning process. Some communities, such as Brookline, also incentivize tree planting through their stormwater regulations. Next slide, please. Maintenance is always the toughest thing to find funding for, but it really can prolong the lifespan of trees and enhance their ability to withstand stress. Our primary recommendations are to increase the awareness of trees, their benefits, and their needs, both within the community and also internally with municipal staff. We also recommend a heritage tree program to increase awareness and appreciation of large or historic trees in the community that are providing a disproportionate amount of the ecosystem benefits. With increased awareness, hopefully increased community-based stewardship, like watering through droughts, will result in a more resilient urban forest. Many of these other recommendations in this section are generally best practices and are already being implemented or strived towards as resources allow, but it's always important to mention. And there's a couple of new and emerging things to keep an eye on, like the risk of fire in these droughts that we're having more frequently and more severely, which is kind of a new threat to consider. Finally, the creation of a municipal tree fund as part of new policies related to the tree protection in the town can receive tree-related funds, fines, and fees, which can provide additional funding for maintenance of public trees in the community. So that is an overview of our recommendations for strategies to protect, expand, and maintain the tree canopy of the Charles River watershed. I think now we're going to move towards a question and answer section. Is that right? Unless there's something you want to add, Dira?
No, I was just gonna say thank you for the overview, and I know we kind of threw a lot of words on the screen for everyone, but we were also hoping to dedicate some good time for folks to ask questions during this session. And I don't know, Amy, if you had wanted to add anything at this point, or kind of wait for folks to come with questions. Again, if you do have questions, feel free to send them directly to myself, Joanna, or Elsia, and I will relay it to our team. If you don't want to use the chat function and would rather unmute, feel free to raise your hand, and you should also be able to unmute as well. But I actually already got a question in the chat. Question is on our GIS study from 2008 to 2021. It provided a snapshot of the rate of tree canopy loss for each town. To find out whether that rate is steady or perhaps accelerating, you could take another measure of tree canopy now. This could provide towns information that would be very motivating. Thank you for that comment, Fred. I believe the decision to do 2008 to 2021 was based on what was available data at the time that we were doing analysis, right, Claire?
Yeah, we fortunately Chad is a very accomplished analyst and was able to locate this data set that allowed us to compare the canopy cover. I mean, it's a great idea. We'd have to make sure that it just was comparable as data. But that certainly is a next step and can be very motivating indeed.
Yeah, I would add that's one of the kind of first steps that most towns do when they make an urban forest plan. So in the ideal world, as each town begins to make that, they would start to have even more specific kind of data on their own town, their current towns, and they could, look at that against that existing data. The other, those data sets kind of come out at intervals. So we're always sort of working with like the intervals of existing data. And I think is an interesting question around how the watershed, at the watershed scale, one can continue to have that information and perhaps is an ongoing discussion, right? As opposed to just individually at the town, town by town level as we move forward. But as Claire mentioned, you kind of getting that data, making that data is actually a quite involved task. And so, we're always sort of working with what exists.
Great, thank you. And then I'll plug in, someone had asked whether our presentation will be shared, and we will be sharing a recording of the webinar as well as the PDF slides so that you all could watch it again or share it with other folks who might be interested. But Rob, I saw your hand up. You should be able to unmute to ask your question.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious about all of the different municipalities that are part of the watershed. And I know it's too many to go into detail about, but I guess I'm wondering which of them actually have tree ordinances or urban forestry plans, and maybe which ones are perhaps the best or the most robust that would be good examples for others to follow if they don't have one of the similar caliber in place already. I know, for example, that Cambridge has a pretty great urban forestry plan, and Somerville has a pretty solid one also. I guess I'm curious about all of the other municipalities and what they could or should be doing. And I guess the last part of the question would be, what would be suggestions as to how they can get those going? I don't know if funding are obstacles or other things, but I'm curious about that.
So the watershed is 35 towns and reaches to the headwaters of the river, which are way out sort of in the 495 belt. And so there is a great range of both resources available for trees and tree care and sort of political support for spending those resources on trees and tree care. And so they're I would say the majority of towns do not currently have a tree ordinance. the wonderful thing about the urban forest planning process is that the community engagement really is designed, if done well, to right size the policies to the needs and the desire of the residents, really to shape what they want their forest to look like. I will say that the data seem to imply, I think it's safe to say that it's still a question that's being actively debated, but it seems that tree ordinances that protect private trees seem to create conditions that allow the canopy to grow. The one signal that's been very clear with studies of the impacts of tree ordinances is that if you protect private trees and then you remove the protection, the canopy declines, because the trees that were not allowed to be removed when they were protected, the people summarily remove those trees when the ordinance goes away. So you kind of have to just make sure that your community has the appetite for, how the tree protection will impact their ability to do other things with, private property, for instance.
Maybe just a quick add. There is when the document comes out, you'll see there is a table there that outlines kind of what's in place in each municipality within the watershed. So the different kinds of protection regulations, including, is there an ordinance, is there not? So to answer your first question, there are various things that kind of resemble them. So it may not be exactly an ordinance, but may have other sort of forms that are somewhat similar. So that will be helpful, I think, to answer your first question. It's not as simple as a yes or no, maybe. And then to your question about urban forest plans, I mean, I think you mentioned Cambridge and Somerville, they're both excellent. Boston also has one. I think the challenge with looking, I think Boston's is probably harder comparatively for the watershed, given the size and scale of the town, the rest of the towns within the watershed. So I think Cambridge is a really good one to look to. But that's something to think about as you're looking at a or a forest plan, as kind of, is it a good example? Is just each, the kind of composition of the town, its scale, its sort of condition and resources matter a lot as to whether or not that forest plan is actually sort of, the degree to which a forest plan is useful as a model. Because they're, it's not quite apples to apples, but I think those offer really good methodologies for thinking about how a forest plan might get together. And I think Cambridge in particular does a really nice job around how they communicate the forest plan to the public. And that has there's a lot of background depth, but then a really easily digestible kind of public facing side. So it's a nice model in that way.
Another thing to kind of be aware of is that, generally speaking, if you're creating an ordinance, you're creating new administrative processes. So you're creating basically work that will either land on somebody who already has a full-time job and thus, perhaps pull away from their other responsibilities. So you just want to make sure that you don't take resources away from the public trees that you're trying to manage if you have your urban forestry staff take on new roles regulating private tree canopy. So it really can be a resource constrained.
Yeah, I think our story map might showcase which towns and cities currently have an ordinance. And it actually might also specify whether or not that ordinance only covers public trees or if the ordinance also covers public and private trees. But what you will probably really take away from the story map and our existing conditions report is it's really like a lot of other policies across Massachusetts, our local ordinances and bylaws. It's a patchwork of like what gets protected and what doesn't across our watershed. And that's also reflective of the makeup of our community, each community that we have. It's very diverse. Our lower basin, where you have Somerville, Cambridge, Watertown, is more urbanized, has less canopy overall, and has to address different challenges and opportunities, whereas our upper and middle already has a lot of existing trees, and their challenges and threats are a bit different. And so the need and type of plan definitely does differ. Fred, I see your hand up, but I did get a question in the chat so before we get to you, I'm just gonna quickly ask Claire and Amy if you guys would want to take this question on. What steps do you suggest for the most efficient and effective tree care in drought? It's awfully hard to provide help everywhere. Do you, I guess maybe the question is, do you also put priority on specific trees maybe?
So I think that supplemental watering for trees that are still becoming established, so those trees that have been transplanted within the last 5 years, in a drought situation, it's especially like the drought we're currently experiencing and the one we had last year, it's possible to overwater trees, but it's a difficult task when it's such a low moisture situation. So I think that the public education is really important because a lot of times people don't really observe trees closely. And so by the time the impacts of the drought are really starkly visible and kind of impossible not to notice, it's often too late because the tree's woody tissue, once it thoroughly dehydrates and dies back, it doesn't spring back the way a lawn will, for example, after a drought. It's a one-way process of cell death. So I think watering alerts, there is a nonprofit in another major city in a different part of the country that puts out a weekly watering alert and characterizes the need to water as, 3 different levels or whatever. But I just think that people need to be reminded, because I think that a lot of times the damage is irreversible by the time that it's really noticed and that people act on it. So, Amy, do you have anything to add?
No, I just would maybe re-highlight the first part of your response, which was really about kind of how do you prioritize? I think prioritizing those younger, emerging trees as the ones that really need to make it through the drought, whereas some of the older trees can commonly, have a better survival rate. So I think that's maybe important, the way the question was asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally water my I have a very small yard, and so my trees don't have adequate soil volume, so I water my mature and established trees as well, just because I know that they're challenged.
Fred?
Yes, thank you for taking my question. I was thinking about your recommendation for heritage tree programs, and as far as I can tell, these are always run by non-municipal government organizations. They're privately sponsored and run, and it makes me wonder, are there any towns that you know of that are doing an exemplary job of private organizations working in teamwork with the town agencies and the municipal staff. Because as you said before, enforcement is all these things we're trying to do take staff time, and budgets are limited, and so I'm just wondering if there are any cities or towns where volunteer organizations have really stepped in to help out.
Well, almost every community has at least one community-based organization that is interested in trees or beautification or, environmental sustainability kind of issues. I'm trying to think of an example within the watershed of an exemplary heritage tree program, and nothing really is springing to mind. I think it is usually an educational tool, but there are towns that have size classifications in their tree ordinances. And in fact, the example that I like the most is actually not, it's not an NGO, it's as part of the urban forest plan, the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, defined trees over 3 feet in diameter at breast height to be heritage trees and added them to the protections of Chapter 87, which is basically just adding more municipal layers of review for activities that might impact them. Which is interesting because in that case, it really encompasses all large trees in that city.
Are those public trees then that they're protecting?
So then as Chapter 87 tree is called a public shade tree, but of course, in the case of Springfield, they're saying that their public shade trees, some of them are on private property if they're, these significantly large trees that presumably have large canopies. So
they have a tree bylaw or a tree ordinance.
They have a tree ordinance
Okay.
that includes the size classification.
And rather than just asking for mitigation for cutting this tree, they actually try to forbid the cutting of that tree.
Well, it provides additional administrative review. I think that as these regulations are implemented in different communities, there is a desire to really work with residents and developers to come up with outcomes that are sort of mutually acceptable. And so I think that in many cases, there's fees and payments and other ways of mitigation, tree planting at other locations and sort of other ways that projects are allowed to go forward while protecting the canopy as much as possible.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fred, I would just give you also one other, I don't know how they've handled heritage trees specifically, but 3 towns that have really, I think, strong kind of community organizations so you might look to them is Los Angeles actually has Tree People and City Trees that work really closely with their chief forestry officer, and I think they are a possible kind of example. And then as well, Dallas has the Texas Tree Foundation, which is very embedded in both in a number of really interesting techniques or approaches to the urban forestry plan, including kind of training internal city workers. And then Atlanta also, and I can't remember the name of Atlanta's organization. I don't know if you know it, Claire, but they also work very closely with the city. So those three just might be, you know, places to have a look for this kind of strong community organization and city collaboration.
Yeah, I can't remember the name, but I do recall that the Atlanta Tree People, maybe? The Atlanta group works in multiple municipalities in sort of greater Atlanta, which is an interesting model. And Chicago also has an initiative that is housed at their Arboretum, the Morton Arboretum in Chicago, that is for the greater Chicago area. So working in across different municipalities. You know, and that in Massachusetts, we have our home rule style of government, which means we don't do county stuff as much, apparently. And so that, you know, perhaps it's easier to do that kind of regional stuff in those other locations. I'm not exactly sure, but you know, the benefit of having this home rule style government is that it's really a kind of choose your own adventure in terms of defining how you're going to interpret and implement Chapter 87 in your community. What that looks like, and that can reflect the shared goals that people decide they can agree on, you know, what they're trying to achieve.
I got in the chat, David said it's Tree Atlanta,
Yeah.
and Tree Charlotte is also very embedded in their city tree work. All right, David.
Yes, I'm the chair of the Concom in Medway, and somebody was asking a question a little earlier about tree protections for private trees on private land. And if you want to go look, the town of Medway has a tree protection bylaw that restricts the cutting of trees on private land within zoning setbacks. And if people want to do, you know, obviously it impacts builders and developers. If they want to cut down the trees in those areas, they actually have to contribute to a tree fund with which the Concom can use to plant any trees on public land. So we're not a, you know, we're in the Upper Charles, so we're a more rural town than Somerville and Boston and Cambridge and all that. So it's been fairly effective, and we've raised quite a bit of money by doing that. So like I said, if somebody wanted to take a look, you can go on the town of Medway's website and check our bylaws. It's one of the more recent ones, and that might give you a blueprint of what you might want to do in your town.
Thank you so much, and congratulations. That sounds like a great achievement.
Yeah, it was a job.
Great, thank you. We have, let's see if there's any other questions coming in. We do have a couple more minutes for questions if folks want to unmute or provide questions in the chat. Let me see. Oh yes, great question. What could be done to promote nurseries growing important natives? Doug Talamy highly recommends, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Quercus prenoid. First-street trees, yeah, first-street trees in poor soils. Seems like it's something hard to find in our area, but yeah, we've had a lot of discussions as well around native trees and nurseries. So I don't know, Claire, if you want to take that.
Yeah, the nursery industry is a really interesting part of the tree planting picture. We're really fortunate to have the Native Plant Trust here, which is headquartered in Wayland now, I think, but they have a nursery in Framingham at their original site that sells native plants, and I believe all of their plants are produced by seed, so they're not varieties. They have genetic diversity across their, you know, populations of plants they're selling. So that is also good for resilience. But yeah, no, it's difficult sometimes to get certain native trees that are just not in high demand in the horticultural trade. And I know there are some nonprofits that are starting their own small nursery operations as well. I hope that is enough of an answer. But it certainly is it's a space where there's certainly room for growth and innovation.
Great, thanks, Claire. I don't see any other questions on my end. I don't know if Joanna or Ilsia, you guys are getting anything more on your end.
I have not.
Me either.
Okay. All right. Oh, I just got something. Yeah, and we have some time. Is David still here? Yes. David, if you're available, someone is wondering if you could share a little bit of suggestion on how you succeeded in getting your bylaw passed.
Okay, well, we certainly did a lot of preparation for this. I had to meet with one of the selectmen 5 separate times to explain to him exactly what this meant, because obviously you're going to get a lot of pushback from builders and developers. So you have to be quite prepared to answer their questions, and everybody has, you know, all sorts of different questions. They want to know if they want to put a deck on, is that going to affect them? That kind of stuff. So it takes patience. Like with all bylaws, oftentimes take patience. I mean, since I've been the chair of the Concom, I think we've passed 5 bylaws, and we've never not gotten one that we put out there passed, but you have to put in the time, and that's really all you have to do. So you have to go and, you have to go in front of the finance committee. You have to tell them this is what we plan on doing, it because they make one of the recommendations. You have to go to the select board. So it's important when you do this thing that you don't just do it in a vacuum, that you explain it and explain it clearly to as many people as you can. And that's how we did it in Medway. We get out there, and even before we had it on the agenda for a town meeting, we went out to the previous town meeting with a bunch of flyers and saying, this is what we want to do. This is, how it benefits the town, that kind of stuff. And, we got enough public support, so it passed fairly easily. But I mean, I know there was pushback, especially with the select board, because, developers and builders in town and real estate agents and stuff like that didn't want to see this. But like I said, it's an easy case to make. You just have to be persistent. I don't know, does that answer your question? I don't know.
I think it does. And thank you for sharing, taking the spotlight in this session. Also resource sharing for us. But I actually wanted to highlight, if anyone here is thinking of doing of having a tree bylaw or ordinance passed and you live in one of our watersheds, we do have, one of my colleagues does work on helping towns and cities pass a tree ordinance, among other ordinances that we focus on, like wetlands ordinance. So if you are interested and would like support from us on that, feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can get you in contact with our staff as well. All right, don't see anything else coming through the chat, so I will take this opportunity to just highlight what we are doing next with the plan. So we've done our existing conditions report. We've pulled together recommended strategies for protecting, maintaining, and expanding tree canopy. And so our next step obviously is to publish the plan, which we're hoping to do, I would like in the next month or so. And so keep an eye out. And if you guys, well, since you all have registered for this webinar, you will be getting an email directly when we do publish the plan. So keep an eye out for that email coming from us. And you know, as plan goes, this is not the end all be all for everything we do with trees with the Climate Compact. This, like our other plans that we have made, is a stepping point for us and the Climate Compact members to identify recommendations that we may want to support them to take further, or look into more analysis or regional planning with the work that we're doing related to addressing, you know, climate impacts across our watershed. And so, you know, we're really excited that we have come to the end of this plan. We got a lot of support from our consulting team, Claire, Amy, and Chad. A lot of effort gone into putting this together. So I also want to give a shout out to them and my other colleagues who are on this call and putting all of that together, and you all for coming and providing your thoughts and questions and input into the process. My email is here on the slide, but you should also have seen it in your RSVP email, so you can contact me that way. You can also sign up to CRWA's monthly newsletter, where you can get updates on this project and all the other amazing projects that my colleagues are on. And in the follow-up email, I will also send a link to our story map. So if you haven't already, you can check out the existing conditions, and you can look at it kind of town by town in a closer look if you are interested. And with that, we are going to close out. Thank you, everyone. Thank you also to our interpreter.
Thank you, Dira, and thank you, Joanna and Amy and everyone, the interpreter, for all your help and support during this process. It's been wonderful.
Great. Well, I hope everyone has a good rest of your night.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Well.
Thanks.